The avoidant can feel it. Something fundamental has shifted in you, and the change is radiating from you in ways they can't ignore or explain away. You're not acting wounded. You're not performing strength while bleeding underneath. You're not pretending to be over them while clearly still hoping they'll come back. Something genuine has transformed in your energy, your presence, your entire way of being. You've let go, not strategically, not as a tactic to make them chase you, but actually, truly let go. And the avoidant is experiencing this shift as a loss so profound, it's rewriting their understanding of what you meant to them and what they've destroyed by not being able to show up. This isn't the temporary distance you created before when you needed space to process their latest withdrawal. This isn't the frustrated silence that would eventually break when you missed them too much. This isn't the wounded retreat that still carried hope they'd change. This is something completely different. You've arrived at a place of genuine peace that doesn't include them, genuine wholeness that doesn't need them, genuine happiness that exists entirely independently of whether they're in your life or not. The avoidant is watching you from whatever distance they're at, whether that's physical proximity or distant observation, and they're seeing someone who has fundamentally moved on. And the loss of your need for them, your hope in them, your belief in their potential, that loss is destroying them in ways losing your presence never did. What's annihilating the avoidant is that they can tell this change is real. They're experts at reading people, at detecting when someone is performing disinterest while secretly still caring. They can usually sense when someone's detachment is a defense mechanism rather than genuine indifference. But they can't detect any performance in you. There's no bitterness that would indicate you're still emotionally engaged. There's no coldness that would suggest you're protecting a wound. There's no warmth that would hint at remaining affection. There's just serene neutrality, the kind that comes from someone who has genuinely processed, healed, and moved forward into a life where you're simply not a factor anymore. And this authentic transformation is triggering a grief in the avoidant they have no framework for managing, the energetic shift they can't deny. The avoidant is feeling the loss of you in their body before their mind can fully articulate it. Your energy toward them has completely changed, and they're responding to it viscerally. When you were still hoping, still trying, still invested, there was an energetic cord between you that they could feel even when you weren't in contact. They could sense your attention on them, your thoughts including them, your emotional state being affected by their behavior. That invisible connection gave them a strange comfort, even as they ran from it. They always knew you were there, holding space for them, waiting for them to be ready. But that cord has been cut. The energetic connection has dissolved. The avoidant can feel the absence of your attention in ways that create actual physical sensations of loss. There's a hollow place where your focus on them used to be, an emptiness where your hope for them used to reside, a void where your emotional investment used to exist. They're experiencing this energetic withdrawal as abandonment, even though they were the ones who pushed you away repeatedly. They're feeling bereft even though they're the ones who created the distance. The loss of being held in your heart, even at a distance, is devastating them. This energetic shift is undeniable because it's not something you're doing to them. It's something you're being without them. You're not directing any energy toward them at all, positive or negative. You're not thinking about them with anger or hurt. You're not avoiding them with effort. You're not remembering them with longing. You've genuinely redirected your entire energetic output toward your own life, your own growth, your own future that doesn't include them. And the avoidant can feel the withdrawal of your life force from their orbit, can sense that they've been removed from your emotional consideration, and it's creating a panic in them that's completely irrational, but absolutely consuming. The avoidant is also feeling the change in how you hold yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. There's a lightness to you now that wasn't there when you were still carrying hope for them. There's a peace that comes from no longer betraying yourself to accommodate someone else's limitations. There's a confidence that emerges when you stop making yourself small for someone else's comfort. They're seeing you inhabit yourself more fully than you did when you were still trying to fit into the limited space they offered. And watching you flourish without them, watching you become more yourself in their absence, is teaching them that they weren't adding to your life. They were diminishing it. the loss of your belief in them. What's destroying the avoidant is recognizing they've lost something infinitely more valuable than your romantic interest. They've lost your belief in them. When you were still engaged, still trying, you saw potential in them they couldn't see in themselves. You believed they could grow, could become more vulnerable, could develop capacity for sustained intimacy. You held a vision of who they could be that was more generous and hopeful than any vision they held for themselves. That belief was a gift they never acknowledged while they had it, but now that it's gone, the loss is catastrophic. Your belief in them was doing work they didn't recognize. It was creating possibility for transformation. It was holding space for growth. It was maintaining hope during periods when they couldn't hope for themselves. It was seeing their defended, fearful behavior and looking beneath it to the wounded person who was worth loving and fighting for. That belief was a form of love they couldn't receive at the time, but it was sustaining them in ways they never understood. It was making them feel like maybe, possibly they could be better. Like maybe there was a version of them capable of real intimacy. But you don't believe in them anymore. Not because you're punishing them or trying to hurt them, but because you've reallocated that belief toward yourself and your own capacity to build the kind of life and relationships you deserve. You're no longer investing faith in their potential because you've recognized that potential. Without actualization is just a story you were telling yourself to justify accepting less than you deserved. The avoidant can feel the absence of your belief like a light going out, and they're discovering that being seen as capable of growth felt better than they realized. Being given up on feels worse than they could have imagined. This loss is particularly devastating because the avoidant is realizing they needed your belief more than they needed your presence. Your belief was what allowed them to tolerate your closeness at all. You saw something in them worth loving despite their limitations, and that vision helped them feel less broken, less damaged, less fundamentally flawed. But without your belief, they're left alone with how they see themselves, and that vision is harsh and unforgiving. They're confronting themselves without the buffer of your generous interpretation, and they don't like what they're seeing. Your belief was a mirror that showed them a kinder reflection. Without it, they're stuck with reality. The transformation they're witnessing. The avoidant is watching you transform into someone they don't recognize, and the transformation is forcing them to confront what they lost through their inability to show up. You're not the same person who was patient with their limitations. You're not the same person who accommodated their need for space. You're not the same person who bent yourself into uncomfortable shapes to make room for their fear. You've become someone with clearer boundaries, higher standards, less tolerance for behavior that doesn't serve you. And the person you've become wouldn't give the person they were the time of day. This transformation is visible in concrete ways the avoidant can't deny. You're pursuing goals you put on hold when you were focused on them. You're building friendships and community you neglected while managing their inconsistency. You're investing in yourself with the energy you used to spend, trying to make them comfortable enough to love you. You're thriving in ways that make it clear you weren't the problem in the dynamic. They were. And watching you flourish without them is proving that their narrative about you being too needy or too emotional or too much was always a lie. They told themselves to avoid accountability. The avoidant is also seeing that you've developed discernment you didn't have before. You're no longer someone who would accept their breadcrumbs. You're no longer someone who would wait indefinitely for someone to get their act together. You're no longer someone who would prioritize potential over present reality. You've learned from what happened between you, extracted the lessons, and used them to level up your entire approach to relationships and self-worth. The person you've become is someone the avoidant would actually want to be with, but the person you've become wouldn't want them because that person knows better now. The transformation includes a lightness and joy the avoidant never saw in you when you were together. You're laughing more freely. You're engaging with life more fully. You're radiating an energy that's magnetic and alive in ways you weren't when you were managing their fear and trying to be small enough to fit in their limited capacity for intimacy. The avoidant is seeing what you look like when you're not dimming yourself for someone else's comfort. And the vision is both beautiful and devastating. Beautiful because you're genuinely flourishing. Devastating because your flourishing is happening without them, and is clear evidence that they were holding you back. the realization that you're actually better without them. The most psychologically brutal aspect of feeling your loss is the growing certainty that you're not just okay without them, you're actually better. The avoidant told themselves stories to justify their behavior. They convinced themselves you needed them, that you'd be lost without them, that their presence was a gift you should be grateful for. But watching you now, seeing how you've grown and transformed and thrived, they're confronting the reality that the relationship was costing you something essential. You're healthier without them, happier without them, more yourself without them. This realization is destroying the avoidant's entire narrative about the relationship. They thought they were being generous by giving you any attention at all. They thought you were lucky to have access to them even in their limited capacity. They thought their presence was adding to your life despite their emotional unavailability. But the evidence of your current state proves otherwise. You weren't benefiting from the relationship despite its difficulties. You were suffering. You were diminishing yourself. You were betraying your own needs to accommodate someone who couldn't reciprocate your effort. And leaving was the best thing you could have done for yourself. The avoidant is also recognizing that they were an anchor preventing you from reaching your potential. Every moment you spent trying to make them comfortable was a moment you weren't spending on yourself. Every ounce of energy you used managing their fear was energy you couldn't use pursuing your own growth. Every time you made yourself smaller to fit their limitations, you were choosing them over yourself. And now that you've chosen yourself, now that you've redirected all that energy toward your own life, you're becoming everything you were always capable of being. The avoidant is seeing that they weren't just neutral in your life. They were actively harmful, a weight you needed to shed to rise. This understanding includes recognizing that you don't need what they were offering because it was never enough to build on anyway. The avoidant thought their limited availability was better than nothing, that their sporadic attention was a gift, that their occasional warmth made up for their consistent coldness. But you've discovered that nothing is actually better than the something they were offering. Being alone and whole is healthier than being coupled and diminished. Having no relationship is superior to having a relationship that requires you to betray yourself constantly. The avoidance offering has been weighed and found worthless, and that judgment is crushing them. The loss of who they got to be with you. The avoidant is grieving not just the loss of you, but the loss of who they got to be when you were in their life. You brought out parts of them they can't access with anyone else. You made them feel safe enough to be slightly more vulnerable than their baseline. You created space where they could occasionally let their guard down. You loved them in ways that penetrated their defenses just enough that they could feel cared for without feeling completely exposed. They were a better version of themselves with you, and losing you means losing access to that better self. With you, the avoidant could occasionally be tender. They could sometimes be playful. They could rarely but genuinely be open about their fears and wounds. These moments were exceptions to their usual defended state, and they were only possible because you created extraordinary safety through your patience and understanding. But they took that safety for granted. They thought it would always be available. They didn't realize that the container you were holding for their growth required your willing participation, and eventually you would stop participating because maintaining that container was costing you too much. Now the avoidant is discovering they can't be that version of themselves with anyone else. Other people don't have your specific combination of patience and boundaries, acceptance and standards. Other people don't understand their wounds the way you did. Other people don't create the specific kind of safety that occasionally allowed them to be vulnerable. They're back to being their fully defended self all the time, and they're realizing how exhausting that is, how lonely, how empty. You gave them respite from their own defenses, and losing that respite means losing the only moments when they felt genuinely human and connected. The avoidant is also grieving the loss of being seen fully by someone who loved them anyway. You saw their fear, their damage, their dysfunction, and you didn't run. You saw all of it and chose to stay and work with it. That experience of being fully known and still chosen was more valuable than they realized. It contradicted their core belief that if anyone really saw them, really knew them, they'd be abandoned. But you proved that belief wrong. You saw everything and loved them through it. And now they've lost the only person who ever truly knew them and chose them anyway. The irretrievability of what they've lost. The avoidant is confronting a truth that's suffocating them. What they've lost can't be gotten back. Not because you're vindictive or punishing, but because the person you were when you loved them doesn't exist anymore. That person has grown, transformed, become someone different. Even if you were willing to try again, which you're clearly not, the dynamic could never be recreated because you're not the same person. You've evolved past the point where you tolerate what you tolerated before. You've developed boundaries that would never allow the dynamic you had before to reestablish itself. This irretrievability is particularly torturous because the avoidant can see so clearly now what they had. They understand your value completely. They recognize the gift you are offering. They see what they destroyed through their fear and their inability to reciprocate your effort. But seeing clearly doesn't give them access to a second chance. Understanding doesn't create an opportunity to do it differently. They've been given the wisdom that comes from loss, which is the cruelest kind of wisdom because it arrives too late to prevent the loss it teaches about. The avoidant is also grappling with the reality that even if they've grown, even if they've done work on themselves, even if they're more capable of intimacy now, it doesn't matter. You're not waiting around to see if they become better. You're not holding space for their eventual transformation. You've moved on to a life where their growth is irrelevant because they're irrelevant. The avoidant is experiencing the brutal lesson that people don't wait forever, that patience has limits, that you can lose someone not because the relationship was impossible, but because you took too long to make it possible. The irretrievability extends to all the moments they could have had with you, but chose to avoid because intimacy felt too threatening. All the vulnerable conversations they could have had, all the experiences they could have shared, all the memories they could have built. All of it is gone now, not because time ran out naturally, but because they ran out the clock through their consistent unavailability. They're mourning a future that could have existed if they'd been braver, and that mourning is compounded by the knowledge that the future is foreclosed entirely by their past behavior, the comparison to their current reality. The avoidant is feeling the loss of you most acutely when they compare their life with you to their life without you. With you, even though they couldn't appreciate it at the time, they had someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. They had someone who thought about them, checked on them, remembered details about their life. They had someone who was building toward a future with them, even when they couldn't commit to that future. They had someone who was doing the work of two people in the relationship, carrying both sides of the connection while they did the bare minimum. Without you, they have their defended solitude, which they always claimed to prefer. They have their independence, which they insisted was more important than partnership. They have their freedom from expectations, which they maintained was worth the cost of connection. But the solitude is lonelier than they remembered. The independence is emptier than they expected. The freedom feels less like liberation and more like isolation. They're discovering that what they thought they wanted, unlimited space and zero accountability, is actually just a sophisticated form of loneliness that they were protected from recognizing while you were buffering them from its full impact. The comparison is particularly devastating when the avoidant considers who's in their life now versus who you were. They might be dating or pursuing other connections, but everyone feels inadequate compared to what you offered. Nobody has your patience, nobody has your understanding, nobody has your capacity to love someone through their defenses. The avoidant is measuring everyone against you and finding everyone lacking. And this comparison is teaching them that you weren't ordinary or easily replaced. You were extraordinary, and they lost something rare because they couldn't overcome fear that wasn't even based in present reality. The avoidant is also comparing who they are now to who they were with you, and the comparison is damning. With you, they had moments of genuine connection that made them feel less broken. They had someone who believed in their capacity for growth. They had a relationship that was challenging them to be better even as they resisted that challenge. Without you, they're stagnant. They're not growing. They're not being challenged. They're comfortable, but in the way that comfort can become a cage. You were uncomfortable in the best way, the way that creates growth, and losing you means losing the only force in their life that was pushing them toward becoming more than their defended, limited self. The permanence of the scar you're leaving. The avoidant is recognizing that losing you is going to leave a permanent scar on their psyche. You're not going to be someone they forget or get over completely. You're going to be the one that got away, the one they think about when they're alone, the one they measure everyone else against, the one they regret losing for the rest of their lives. This permanence is setting in as they watch you genuinely move forward, as they feel the reality of your absence settling into their bones, as they understand that this loss is final and irreversible. The scar you're leaving is different from scars left by previous relationships. Those were relationships the avoidant ended, situations where they walked away feeling like they'd made the right choice. But this scar comes from being left, from having someone genuinely give up on them, from watching someone they took for granted discover they're better off without them. It's the scar of recognizing they destroyed something precious through their own dysfunction. It's the scar of understanding too late what someone meant to them. It's the scar of learning that some losses teach lessons that can only be learned through permanent deprivation of what was lost. The permanence is also about how you've changed their baseline. The avoidant will never again be able to take someone's patience for granted without remembering what happened when they took yours for granted. They'll never again be able to assume someone will wait indefinitely without recalling how you eventually stopped waiting. They'll never again be able to maintain their illusion that their limited capacity is sufficient without confronting the evidence that it cost them you. You've permanently altered their understanding of consequences, of limits, of how long someone will tolerate being treated as optional before they choose themselves instead. The avoidant is feeling the loss of you in waves that keep intensifying rather than diminishing. Each wave brings new recognition of what you were, what you offered, what they destroyed. Each wave carries deeper understanding of how catastrophically they misjudged the situation. Each wave leaves them more certain that they've lost something they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to find again in other people and never finding, because it was specific to you, to who you were, to what you uniquely offered. They thought you were nothing until something changed in you, until you went silent, until you transformed into someone who genuinely doesn't need them. And now they're feeling the loss of you as the loss of the best thing that ever happened to them, the thing they only recognized as best when it was too late to keep it.